I'm 27 now. This happened 3 years ago, and I still think about it more than I probably should. My girlfriend Emily and I rented a cabin near Hocking Hills in southern Ohio, early November. The kind of weekend where the sky never really gets bright, just goes from dark gray to light gray and back again. Cold rain the whole time, the kind of mud that sticks to everything. We'd both been running on empty for months. Work, phones, noise. We wanted quiet. Just 2 days of nothing. The cabin wasn't isolated exactly. There were a few others spread across the property, but you couldn't see any of them through the trees unless you drove around. Close enough to feel safe, far enough to feel alone. We stopped outside Logan for gas and grabbed food for the weekend. Burgers, chips, 2 six-packs. Got to the cabin a little after 4. Key was in a lockbox by the front door, just like the listing said. The first night was good. We made dinner, sat under the awning watching the rain, got a fire going until midnight. Emily fell asleep before I did. I stayed up a little longer and just listened to the woods. I didn't notice anything wrong that night, or if I did, I wasn't paying attention to it the right way. The next morning, I went around back to grab firewood. The pile was more scattered than I remembered from the night before. I figured maybe other renters had grabbed wood recently, or an animal knocked something over. I stacked a few logs back, grabbed what I needed, and went inside. Over breakfast, Emily mentioned she thought she'd heard footsteps outside the bedroom window sometime during the night. I told her it was probably deer. We'd already seen 3 of them near the road on the drive in. She didn't look up from her coffee. She just said, "On gravel?" I didn't have a good answer for that. I said raccoons, maybe. She didn't push it. We went hiking that afternoon and came back soaked. The rain had gotten heavier by the time we turned around. When we got back to the cabin, the lid to the outdoor trash can was halfway off, and one of our empty chip bags was sitting in the mud a few feet away. Animals, still animals. That evening, I went around back for more firewood before it got too dark. That's when I stopped. The logs were stacked differently than before. I know how that sounds, but I'd been back there twice already, and I was sure. 3 or 4 logs had been rearranged, not randomly scattered. Arranged, almost like something to sit on, low to the ground, stable, and they were angled to face the back door of the cabin. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds just looking at it. Then I told myself I'd probably done it myself without thinking. I kicked the logs apart, grabbed an armful, and went back inside. I didn't say anything to Emily. She was already tense about the footsteps thing, and I didn't want to add to it over something I wasn't even sure about. We stayed inside that night. The rain picked up again, and the temperature dropped enough that being outside wasn't really an option anyway. We watched a movie, opened another beer, and I mostly convinced myself to stop thinking about the logs. Around 1 a.m, the motion light outside kicked on. Emily looked over immediately. I pulled the blinds back and tried to see something. Anything. But it was just darkness and trees. The light stayed on for maybe 20 seconds, then reset. I told her it was probably a deer again. She didn't respond to that. I kept looking out the window for a while after. That's when I noticed the firewood pile looked smaller than it had 2 hours ago. I grabbed the flashlight by the door. Emily asked where I was going. I told her I wanted to check something. The ground outside was soaked. Leaves stuck to my shoes with every step. I walked around the side of the cabin toward the small woodshed out back, sweeping the flashlight along the tree line. That's when I found them. Behind the shed, tucked into the narrow gap between the back wall and the tree line, somebody had made a camp. 2 dirty blankets pressed against the shed wall, crushed cigarette butts, empty water bottles, 3 cans of food, one of them already open, a folded piece of cardboard laid flat on the mud like a makeshift floor, Whoever it was had been there for at least a few days, maybe longer. I almost turned back right then. Then my flashlight caught something half buried under the edge of one of the blankets. A sock, pink with a small stripe near the top. I'd been listening to Emily ask about that sock for half the day. I stood there holding the light on it, not moving, trying to make my brain catch up with what I was seeing. Then I heard footsteps in the woods behind me. Not running, not crashing through branches, just slow, deliberate steps through wet leaves. The sound of someone who wasn't trying to get away fast, someone who was deciding what to do next. I turned and pointed the flashlight toward the trees. Nothing, just rain dripping off branches. I walked back to the cabin as fast as I could without running and locked the door behind me. Emily took one look at my face. What happened? I told her someone had been camping behind the shed. I kept my voice flat. I don't know if it worked. I called the property manager. They showed up 40 minutes later with another guy in a pickup. They walked the woods for a while with spotlights. They didn't find anyone. When the owner came back to the cabin, he looked tired more than surprised. He said they'd had issues before. People camping on or around vacant properties once the weather turned. He said it like it was a minor inconvenience, a thing that happened sometimes. That was enough. We packed most of our stuff that night and left before sunrise. For a week, I kept turning it over in my head. How long had that person been back there? How many times had they watched us come and go? The hike, the fire, us sitting under the awning in the rain. The answer is probably the whole weekend. Maybe longer, if they were already there before we arrived. A week after we got home, I was finishing the last of the unpacking when I noticed my gray flannel shirt wasn't in the bag. I went back through everything twice. It wasn't there. I've told myself 100 times that I just forgot it at the cabin. I don't actually believe that. The light appeared on the second night. That was the first thing that felt wrong, even before I understood why. My husband Aaron and I drove up to northern Wisconsin in late October of 2022. My uncle owns an old fishing cabin about 20 minutes outside a small town near the Michigan border. I used to go there as a kid sometimes. Long weekends in the summer, a few fall trips. I hadn't been back in years. The lake was small, no shops nearby, almost no cell service. Just a handful of cabins scattered around the shoreline, most of them closed up for the season by October. The nearest town had maybe one stoplight. Everything past that was tree line. Directly across the lake sat an abandoned cabin. I remembered it from childhood because my uncle used to complain about it. The owner had died years ago. Nobody had dealt with the estate properly, and the place had just been left to rot. The dock was half collapsed. The paint was gone. Every summer, my uncle would look at it and shake his head. We got there on a Thursday afternoon after driving up from Grand Rapids. Colder than expected, not snowing yet, but the kind of cold that made you think it would be soon. We stopped outside Green Bay for supplies because almost everything closer to the cabin was closed for the season. The first day was quiet. Aaron fished off the dock while I cleaned out the fridge. The power had apparently gone out at some point before we arrived, and things had gone bad. We made dinner late and played cards. The cabin across the lake was completely dark, same as always. The second evening, I was washing dishes when a light appeared over there. Soft yellow, visible through the tree line across the water. It wasn't a lamp left on by accident, it was steady and warm, like something being used. I called to Aaron in the next room. Did somebody finally buy that place? He walked to the window. Maybe. That seemed like the reasonable explanation. Cabins get sold, Estates get settled eventually. We didn't talk about it much after that. But the next morning, Aaron picked up my uncle's binoculars while we were having coffee and looked across the lake for a while without saying anything. I waited. "The windows are covered," he said finally. "With what?" "Blankets, maybe, or tarps. Something dark." I looked after him. He was right. Most of the windows on that side were blocked from the inside with dark fabric, and in the morning light, the dock looked even worse than I remembered. Part of it had folded sideways into the water. There was no way it was holding any weight. "That doesn't look usable," I said. Aaron handed the binoculars back without answering. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. People prepping a property for sale sometimes cover windows. Contractors work odd hours. It was probably nothing. I almost believed it. That night I woke up to the sound of a boat motor somewhere outside. It lasted maybe 4 seconds, then it was gone, not fading, just cut off. I checked my phone, 2:17 a.m. When I looked toward the lake, the light across the water was on again. I watched it for a few minutes, then lay back down. I didn't wake Aaron. I don't know exactly why. I think part of me didn't want to say out loud what I was starting to think. The next afternoon we drove into town for groceries. On the way back, Aaron looked straight ahead at the road and asked, out of nowhere, if I wanted to leave Saturday morning instead of Sunday. Aaron is never the one who wants to leave early. That's not a thing he does. I asked why. He just said, "Just asking." I said, "Sure." When we got back, we walked down to the shoreline near the canoe dock. That's where Aaron stopped walking. The mud near the canoe was pressed with boot prints, deep ones, heavy tread. They came from the direction of the trees and ended near the water's edge, right next to the canoe. Not hiking shoes, the kind of tread that comes from serious work boots. Aaron crouched down and looked at them without touching anything. I suggested maybe hunters had come through earlier. He nodded slowly. But for the rest of the afternoon, every few minutes, I'd catch him glancing toward the trees. That night, neither of us turned on many lights inside the cabin. We didn't discuss it, we just didn't. Around midnight, the light came on across the lake again. We sat in the dark living room and watched it together. Neither of us said much. After maybe 15 minutes, it shut off. Then we heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Not fast, not sneaking, just deliberate steps moving along the wall of the cabin toward the front. Aaron got up slowly and moved to the side window near the door. He pulled the edge of the curtain back with 2 fingers and went still. I knew from the way his shoulders changed that someone was out there. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "There's a man by the canoe." I crossed the room and looked. He was standing near the waterline. Dark rain jacket, hood up. He wasn't moving, wasn't checking the canoe, wasn't looking toward the trees, wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there facing the cabin. Completely still. What I remember most is how unhurried he looked, like he had no reason to be anywhere else. Aaron reached over and hit the floodlight switch. The whole yard went white. "Hey," he called out. The man turned immediately and walked into the tree line on the side of the property, not toward the water, not back toward the lake where any boat would have been. Straight into the trees, like he already knew the path. We didn't sleep again that night. We left at first light without finishing our coffee. Later that week, my uncle went up to check on the cabin and called me a few days after. The deputies had searched the abandoned property across the lake. They found signs that someone had been staying there for a while. Propane heaters, canned food, batteries, supplies laid in like someone had planned to be there for some time. My uncle paused before he mentioned the last part. They'd found binoculars inside, set up at a window, pointed across the lake at his cabin. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I still don't know how long that man had been watching us from across the water. I don't know how many nights he sat over there with those binoculars, waiting for the lights in our cabin to go out. What I keep coming back to is how he looked standing there in the yard. Not startled, not caught, just calm. Like he'd been watching us long enough that we weren't strangers to him anymore. I want to start with the camera, because that's where everything changed, even though we didn't understand it that way at the time. This happened when I was 22, summer break. My friend Nolan had gotten permission from his cousin to use a hunting cabin in the mountains outside Libby, Montana for a week. 4 of us made the drive up from Colorado. Me, Nolan, his roommate Eric, and our friend Travis. I don't remember the exact roads anymore. Past the highway, it became logging roads and switchbacks, and then more logging roads, until the trees were so dense on both sides you couldn't see more than 20 feet in. Cell service dropped out completely about halfway up. The cabin appeared at the end of a long dirt stretch, half hidden in the pines. It was old but solid. Small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, a generator out back, no internet, no TV signal, just trees in every direction, and a creek you could hear but not see from the front porch. Nolan's cousin had left a note on the kitchen table about the generator and the water pump. Normal stuff. The last line read, "Stay on marked trails. Poachers in the area sometimes." Eric held the note up and read that line twice, then said, "Welcome to Montana," and tossed it on the counter. We laughed. We spent the first 2 days the way you're supposed to spend a week like that, fishing in the creek, cooking over the fire, drinking past dark on the porch while the temperature dropped. Nobody thought much about the note. On the second morning, Travis spotted ATV tracks in the mud near the access road. Fresh ones, pressed deep, heading uphill into the tree line. Nolan said his cousin had told him that road wasn't really used by anyone else. We didn't dwell on it. Tracks were tracks. People rode around up there. It wasn't our land. That afternoon we hiked past the marked boundary, further than we should have gone. Eric stopped first. He turned around and said, quietly, "Don't come over here." We came over anyway. A deer was hanging from a tree in a small clearing just off the trail, already field-dressed, ribs open, skin pulled down in a clean line. Not hours old. Days, maybe. Nolan said right away that it was out of season. Nobody argued. Travis made some joke about not wanting to end up in a true crime documentary. It got a short, uneasy laugh. We turned around and hiked back fast. That night around the fire, we heard an ATV start up somewhere in the trees uphill, close enough to be clearly mechanical, not far enough to be background noise. It ran for maybe 2 minutes. Then it just stopped. Not faded out, stopped. We sat there listening to the silence it left behind. Eric said, "Maybe they saw the fire." Nobody answered. The next morning, Travis found the camera. It was strapped to a pine tree at the edge of the clearing, about waist height, angled directly at the cabin and at Nolan's truck. I assumed immediately it belonged to Nolan's cousin, a security camera or something for watching the property. Eric reached up and flipped it open. No SD card. But the battery was still inside, recently seated. The contacts were clean. Nolan walked up the hill to call his cousin where the signal was better. He came back 15 minutes later. The camera wasn't his. I asked if we should take it down. Nolan shrugged. Probably someone hunting nearby. Let's just leave it." Nobody said much after that. I think we were all doing the same thing, deciding how worried we actually were and not wanting to be the first one to say it out loud. We grilled steaks that evening and tried to keep things light. Around sunset, I noticed the cooler on the porch wasn't fully latched. I opened it. 3 beers were gone. Not from the current round. I meant from the count I'd done that morning when I restocked it. I was sure of the number. When I brought it up, nobody admitted to taking them. Eric said it wasn't him. Travis thought maybe someone miscounted. We went back and forth on it for a few minutes. It sounds ridiculous to argue about missing beers. I know how it sounds. But that was the first moment I stopped explaining things away. We kept the fire smaller that night and didn't stay out as late. At 3 a.m, I woke up to voices outside the cabin. Not a conversation, whispers, low and close, moving along the outside wall. I sat up and listened. Both other guys were still in their sleeping bags. I leaned over and shook Nolan's shoulder. He looked at me. I put a finger to my lips and pointed toward the wall. He heard it immediately. He sat up without making a sound. The voices moved toward the front of the cabin, toward where the truck was parked. Eric woke up on his own and went to the front window. He held the curtain back maybe an inch. 2 guys, he said quietly, outside by the truck. Travis was sitting up now. Doing what? Eric didn't answer right away. Then, one of them's carrying something. Nolan got up and looked through the gap beside him. He said, barely above a whisper, "That's a rifle." Nobody moved for a few seconds. Then the truck door handle moved. Someone trying it once, firm but not loud, testing it. Nolan went to the back bedroom and came back with his cousin's shotgun. The sound of him racking the slide in that small cabin was the loudest thing I've ever heard. In the silence of 3 a.m, in a space that small, it had a finality to it. Outside, the whispering stopped. I tried 911 on my phone, barely a single bar. The call connected long enough for me to give a rough location. Logging road, outside Libby. Before it dropped, I kept hitting redial. Footsteps moved away from the front of the cabin, back toward the trees. Slow at first, then faster, then gone. No ATV engine, no voices, nothing. The 4 of us sat in the dark for 40 minutes with the lights off, taking turns watching the windows, waiting to hear the truck start or footsteps come back. The deputies arrived just before sunrise. 2 trucks coming down the logging road, headlights cutting through the trees. They walked the property with flashlights, checked the perimeter, found fresh ATV tracks behind the cabin leading uphill. Then they asked about the camera. We showed them where it was. One deputy opened it, checked the slot, looked at it for a long moment. Then he checked the battery compartment. He glanced at the other deputy without saying anything. Nolan asked, "What?" The deputy shut the camera. "Battery's newer," he said. That was all. Before we left, one of the deputies asked if we wanted an escort back to the highway. We said yes, without hesitating. While we packed, nobody talked much. Travis kept checking the windows. Eric loaded the truck in half the time it normally would have taken. We drove out single file. Both deputies in front, then us, then one truck behind. I watched the deputy in the lead truck through the windshield the whole way down. He kept scanning the trees on both sides of the road, not glancing around. Watching. The kind of deliberate, regular sweeping you do when you're actually looking for something. He never relaxed until we hit the pavement. Months later, Nolan called his cousin to ask what had ever come of it. His cousin said it was probably locals. Didn't want to get into specifics. I think about that trail camera sometimes. Not because it was pointed at the cabin, though that's bad enough. Not even because the SD card was gone. What I can't let go of is the battery. Someone had taken the footage, taken it, and then come back and replaced the battery with a fresh one. Which means they intended to keep recording. Which means, as far as they were concerned, they were coming back.